Hello, good morning. Welcome to the Sunday Show. I'm Martin Geisler. Coming up this morning, after another night of bombing between Israel and Iran, there are real fears for oil prices and the global economy. The UK's Energy Minister Michael Shanks will join me live in the studio to discuss that and what Scotland can expect from his government's much-discussed spending review. And after his party's conference in Edinburgh this weekend, the Scottish Conservative leader Russell Findlay will be here to look at what the Tories can do to resurrect their chances at next year's Holyrood elections. After that, it is over to Laura McKeever on the radio and on BBC Sounds. Hi, Laura.
Hi, Martin. Good morning to you. We will have much more on what's going on in the Middle East between Iran and Israel. We'll also hear from the Doctors' Union, the BMA here, who say that GP practices in Scotland are on the brink. And we'll mark 25 years since Scotland repealed Section 28. A full review of all the papers too. I'll see you at 10:30.
Yeah, Laura with us in half an hour on the radio. Right, let's get on with the programme. Yeah, loads to discuss this morning. Remember, you can be part of the conversation if you want to be as well. Just use the hashtag BBC Sunday Show on social media if you want to get in touch. Now, do you remember the spending review? The Chancellor's plan for how billions of pounds of our taxpayers' money will be spent in the coming years. It was revealed, of course, to great fanfare less than 4 days ago. But since then, events, as they so often seem to nowadays, have intervened. Within 48 hours of Rachel Reeves' announcement, Israel launched a massive attack on Iran. And perhaps unsurprisingly, Iran retaliated. Oil prices surged. One bank has forecast they could top $150 a barrel later this year. If that happens, it'll have a huge impact way beyond the petrol pumps. It would play havoc with inflation and with our economy as a whole. That is, we should stress, a worst-case scenario, very much a worst-case scenario, but it does show how vulnerable the world economy is at this massively volatile time. So how does the UK Energy Minister chart a way forward at a time like this? He is with me in the studio this morning, I'm pleased to say, so let's ask him. Michael Shanks, good morning.
Morning, Martin.
How worried are you just now? How worried should we all be just now?
Well, look, clearly the whole situation in the Middle East is concerning, and the government's position very clearly has been to de-escalate on all sides. And I think it's very clear, Prime Minister's outlined just in the last few days how important it is that people pull back and that we do have a diplomatic solution to this in the Middle East. There are, of course, wide-ranging consequences to all geopolitical uncertainty in the world. We want to see a return to diplomacy and a return to talks around tables and a de-escalation. Your government is, as we speak, sending jets to the region. Well, we don't comment on operational matters, but on the principle of it, what we said is that's very targeted around operational support for security for British bases. It's not active engagement in what's going on at the moment, but we don't comment on the operational matters of British forces overseas, but we haven't engaged in these particular attacks. Right, do you know if they're going from Scottish bases? Can you tell us that? No, I can't. Right, OK. Look, you can't either, I think, tell me whether or not you are in COBRA meetings, but we should assume that Cabinet Office Briefing Room A is being deployed at a gravely serious time like this. Are you making a contingency at the moment for what happens and how you cope if oil goes up to $150 a barrel, which we should say is more than double where it is today? Well, I think two things are important to say. First of all, of course, we prepare for all scenarios all the time. So my department takes a really active view on fuel prices right across the world. We monitor regularly stock levels. We've no concerns at the moment. And we have a very diverse range of suppliers into the UK energy market. So we're not concerned at the moment, but clearly we're monitoring it very closely. The second thing I think is it's important not to commentate on where this might go. We're urging restraint, we're urging de-escalation on all sides. We hope that that will happen. And I think it's not right for us to commentate on potential scenarios that might come in the future, but clearly we plan for all possible eventualities. But you are gaming out just now what happens and what the implications are if oil doubles in price, are you? Well, look, we regularly will review the processes if fuel prices increase right across the world. So what does that plan look like? We looked at that, for example, when Russia invaded Ukraine and we saw prices increase. But we can't commentate on a potential future event that we don't know about at the moment. Well, you can if you're gaming it out. What does 150 barrel... Just give us an idea what we could be looking at. What does $150 a barrel look like? Because we don't look at specifics like that, because at the moment, and I do urge this point, we need to be really serious about what the situation is right now. We're urging restraint and de-escalation. It would be wrong to then commentate on what a potential escalation could look like.
Right. Rachel Reeves has just been on with Laura Kuenssberg on the television before us, talking about ramping up energy security. No mention of North Sea oil. I mean, I know you're going to tell me it's a lot more complicated than this. We do have a big basin of oil just off our coast here in Scotland. Is it not a good argument at a time like this for reopening the taps, for encouraging drilling there rather than shutting off drilling there?
Well, I think it's really important to say we're not shutting off drilling in the North Sea. We said very clearly that existing projects will continue to run for their lifespan. The government has no intention of closing any down. We've said that the position on no new licensing is around managing the transition of the future of the basin, but actually it makes very marginal difference to the output from the basin in the long term. It's a declining basin, it's a super mature basin, and so we've been very clear that isn't about our overall supply as a country. And actually the energy security point is really critical in this, because it doesn't matter whether our supplies are coming from the North Sea or from the Middle East or from anywhere else. They're subject to the volatility of international prices, and that's subject to a whole range of factors across the country. We remain exposed to that, whether or not our energy comes from the North Sea or not, and that's why we've set out very clearly our clean power mission around delivering energy independence for the UK, so that we have cheaper, homegrown clean power in this country that removes that volatility from the prices that we're all being paid.
Right, but your approach to the northeast of Scotland, certainly if you listen to some of the really powerful and significant voices coming out of the northeast, Aberdeen and Grampian Chamber of Commerce, unions up there, they're talking about sector-wide flight from Aberdeen and from this sector in Aberdeen. Now, that is a big problem. If you want just transition, you're talking about the whole supply chain being affected by this. 600 jobs have gone at Harbour Energy, one company in Aberdeen since the windfall tax came in. Lots of other companies expressing real concerns about what's going to happen to their staff. These are skills that are leaving that part of the world, which will have a real impact on our ambition to transition to renewables if they go. Will they not?
Well, look, I hear those concerns. I've been in Aberdeen regularly as Energy Minister. I'll be in Aberdeen again this coming week to hear those concerns, but also to start building on what the plan is for the future. Because the truth is we've lost 70,000 jobs, more than 70,000 jobs in the past 10 years. This isn't a transition that suddenly started with the election of a Labour government in 2024. It's a long-term trend because the North Sea is a declining basin. Now, what we have to do is manage that transition in a way that delivers a fair and prosperous future, which means ramping up the investment in what comes next. That's why in the spending review you had significant investment in carbon capture and storage, in hydrogen and in offshore wind, all of which will deliver good, well-paid jobs in the northeast of Scotland and right across the country. And I'm afraid the challenge here to say that the transition is underway but we should just ignore it is the real problem with the Conservatives' position, with Reform's position, with many of those who fail to see a transition has been underway for many years. We need to build up what comes next.
Here's an assessment of your position from Russell Borthwick, who's the Chief Executive of the Aberdeen and Grampian Chambers of Commerce. People in this region are not resisting change, they're delivering it. But this must be a transition and not a cliff edge. If we continue down this path, the social cost will be felt for years to come. Where's the evidence that your government understands what's happening in the North East just now and have a plan to support that community?
Well, the fact is that we've actually been grappling with this question of transition when the previous government just buried their head in the sand and ignored it for 10 years. It's been underway for a long time. Not unlike Grangemouth, we knew the problems were coming, but the previous government did absolutely nothing about it. We're determined not to do that.
So where are the safety
and so in a year,
jobs?
what we've announced is a full consultation on the future of energy in the North Sea, not just about licensing, but around how do we ramp up investment in the workforce of the future? How do we get investment into the supply chains, which is where the bulk of the jobs are in Aberdeen, and those supply chains can do offshore wind just as much as they can do oil and gas. And how do we get to a point where the transition in workers from oil and gas moves at the same pace as the transition into the jobs of the future? Now, I don't pretend that that's easy, but it's not right to simply say that we should just pretend everything's OK and not have a plan. We're determined to put in place that plan.
Well, you did have a plan, right? Because in your manifesto last year, you said GB Energy would deliver 69,000 green energy jobs. How many of them have been delivered a year on? Well,
we've been a year into government. Great British Energy just passed through Parliament. You can't, I'm afraid, click your fingers and make these things happen.
So when will they come at scale?
Well, we've said there will be tens of thousands of jobs in the investment that Great British Energy makes. It just had its £8.3 billion settlement agreed by the Chancellor
2.5 billion of which is now being taken away from renewables and put into nuclear.
Well, no.
A third of the budget's gone.
Being spent on clean power, which is what Great British Energy was set up to do, and nuclear is clean power.
Well, hang on.
And
It wasn't. Whoa. We're not going
thousands of
past that.
jobs.
Let me quote you from your manifesto again last year. Labour said GB Energy would receive £8.3 billion during this Parliament to install thousands of clean power projects through a combination of onshore wind, solar and hydropower projects. No mention of nuclear anywhere in that document.
Well, it's not an exclusive list because there's a lot of other clean energy technologies,
well, you didn't say a third of it would
energy
go in
storage,
nuclear,
for example, that could be part of it. But look, nuclear is part of our energy mix. I'm not going to make any apologies for the government investing in nuclear, where thousands of highly skilled jobs could be delivered, including in Scotland. If it wasn't for the ideological position of the SNP to block new nuclear, we could be delivering those well-paid skilled jobs here in Scotland. They've turned their face against that, and they'll have to answer for that. But look, the broader point here is Great British Energy is all about harnessing the power of the public purse to invest not just in clean power projects directly, but in the supply chains that drive them. Because unlike the previous government, we want to see those well-paid industrialised jobs coming alongside us, not towing in offshore wind and switching it on, but building it in this country and getting the manufacturing jobs that go with it. But that's how we deliver the jobs of the future.
Just before we move on, I'm just going to go back to the initial point, because this can seem quite kind of abstract to a lot of the audience. But what people in Aberdeen are saying is that companies, oil and gas companies, are leaving Aberdeen and those jobs are going. And the point of a transition is effectively like a safety net, that when these people fall out of their jobs, they're caught in this safety net, they're retrained, and then they're put into new renewable jobs. What's happening now in the North East, we're hearing, is people are falling and there's no net and they're just hitting the ground and that's it. Is that a fair assessment? And what's going to happen? When does that net come in at scale to catch these people and push them back into well-paid jobs?
Well, look, every single job loss is hugely distressing for the individuals and for their families and for the community. So I don't for a second discount the impact that job losses have. But I don't think that is an entirely fair assessment, because yes, there's been job losses recently announced, but there's also been thousands of jobs created. Just a few weeks ago, I was in the port of Ardasir visiting what will become one of the most impressive offshore wind construction platforms we've got anywhere in the country, with 1,000 jobs that could be created there. So I don't think we shouldn't just look at one side of the equation here. If a transition means there will be jobs moving from one part of the industry into the other, we need to make sure that that happens. But we also need to support the workers to get those jobs. And that's why we announced incredibly quickly the passporting support, where if you're an offshore oil and gas worker doing a particular job and you could do the same job in offshore wind, you shouldn't have to re-qualify and have your skills reassessed. You should be able to move straight into that job. That's something the previous government dithered with for a long time. We delivered it.
Right. Tell me about the ACON project. That was the big announcement last week, £200 million of public money. That money's being put on the table to try and lure in private money, right? That's a kind of simple way of putting it. What happens if that private money doesn't come in?
Well, I think there's two things with the ACON project. It's a hugely important project. We've said we supported from day one, but we needed to wait for the spending review because it is a significant amount of public money. We've now backed that. After years of dither and delay by the Conservatives, we've actually put our money where our mouth is.
But this isn't a guarantee this thing will happen,
and it's
right?
development funding. The ACON project now has to go forward, first of all, to financial close. So it has to bring in some other investors. But there's other development work to go on as well. What happens if that doesn't happen? And this is a commitment to support that development. Well, we think that there is private sector investment. We've already seen billions of investment in some of the other carbon capture projects. They needed government to be that sort of first lever to crowd in the other investment. We've put our money on the table to deliver that, and we're confident that will happen.
Well, I mean, there was another project here in Scotland very recently where £200 million was put on the table in the same way to try and lure in investment. It was at Grangemouth, £200 million down there to save the oil refinery effectively. If somebody wanted to come in and transform that to make clean fuel, the £200 million was there. What's happening with that? Where are we with that?
We've had some really positive meetings around potential investors. In fact, there's more than 80 potential investors come forward. Scottish Enterprise is driving forward the due diligence on that. There's a number of really credible projects that we're developing at the moment. We hope we'll have some really positive announcements to say soon.
Will those jobs be saved?
Well, what we're looking at is what future jobs will look like.
Yeah.
We've said that throughout. We supported the retraining of the Grangemouth workforce, and a significant number have now undertaken that individualised training. But we want to create the jobs of the future. And crucially, the £200 million from the National Wealth Fund, an unprecedented commitment from the UK government, is around a long-term sustainable future for that site. So we don't want just another short-term investment that 5 years or 10 years down the line we end up with further issues. We want a long-term investment, and that's what we're looking at.
Should we expect a significant announcement at some point soon on Grangemouth?
I'm hopeful we will have announcements soon. I'm not involved in the due diligence, as you wouldn't expect, but there are some really exciting, viable projects coming forward that will deliver jobs in Grangemouth long into the future.
Right. Look, one last thing. The Scottish Government said last week it was being shortchanged by the spending review. Shona Robeson said that basically her government is getting about 50% less in terms of an increase than most other government or most government departments are elsewhere. That's how the Barnett formula is calculated. She says we've been absolutely shortchanged. I listened to Kirsty McNeill, your UK government colleague on Good Morning Scotland this morning, saying, well, it's different that because the Scottish Government have got tax varying powers. Is the message from your government that we have to be taxed more in order to get the same as other government departments? Is that the policy? I
think the message from the government is that Shona Robeson should understand how government finances work. She's taken that in a calculation purely of what devolved spending areas is and completely ignores...
That's how the Barnett formula works. That's how the Barnett formula
completely ignores all of the reserved spending. So in my department, for example, a lot of the energy investment is reserved. That is pouring into Scotland through carbon capture and storage, hydrogen, offshore wind funding, Great British Energy. She conveniently ignores all of those things when she makes her calculations. So look, the UK government is investing in Scotland, an unprecedented settlement for the Scottish Government, the biggest it's ever had since devolution. It's now for the SNP to say how they're actually going to spend that money so that people's lives in Scotland improve.
£1 billion less than it would have been if we'd been given parity with government departments elsewhere.
But again, I think that's a misunderstanding of the calculation. It's had a significant increase, more than £9 billion increase in its budget. That is a sizable increase.
Fraser of Allender have totally discounted that. They say that's predicated on no increase at all in the first place, which is totally unrealistic.
Well, the truth is the Scottish Government has the biggest settlement they've ever had in a 3-year financial settlement from the UK Government. And instead of going on around how they think they've been shortchanged with not understanding the formula, what would be better is for them to say, how are we going to invest it in improving the NHS in Scotland, which is far too disappointing for too many people? How are we going to improve education standards? How are we going to bring down crime levels? That's what we want the Scottish Government to be talking about, and they should focus on that instead of what we've got at the moment, which frankly is chaos at the heart of John Swinney's government.
We will talk to them about that next time they're on. We have run out of time. Michael Shanks, thank you very much indeed for being with us this Sunday morning. Thank you. Now, they are the second biggest party in the Scottish Parliament, a position they'll want to hold on to at next year's Holyrood elections. But that is not going to be an easy task for the Scottish Conservatives, who, remember, at the recent Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse by-election, were pushed into 4th place behind Reform UK. I'm going to speak to their leader, Russell Findlay, in just a minute. First, though, let's hear what some of the delegates at this week's Scottish Tory conference had to say when our correspondent Andrew Kerr asked them about the threat that's being posed to their party by Reform.
I think they are a threat. I mean, how it stands currently, they're, in my view, mostly a protest vote. People aren't ready to vote Conservative again. We saw that last year.
They've picked up on issues that people care about, which is quite right. We should all be doing that, looking at issues that people want. However, that's all they're there for, and that's all they're pushing them there. And I think they're a party that is coming up, but it'll go down just as quick as well.
We just need to get out there and explain what we've got, because they haven't really. They can offer anything, but they've no track record. We can't prove that what they can do or can't do.
They are winning things right now because they're the flavour of the month. And luckily for them, they've got Nigel Farage, who is very performative, he's a showman, he's charismatic, and he's taking a lot of his policies or policy ideas from Trump, which is very popular for certain people right now, but can he actually deliver? And I don't think they can.
Andrew Kerr there, hearing the thoughts of some of those attending the Scottish Conservative Party conference, and the party leader, Russell Findlay. He's here just now. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Good to see you. Reassuring, perhaps, some of the absolute faithful, the hardcore party faithful saying, look, we're going to be all right, don't worry too much about Reform. It's all a bit complacent, isn't it? They're smashing you around the wicket everywhere.
Absolutely not. We are up for the fight. We are a party who are resilient, and the reason people in the party and voters across Scotland trust us because they know what we stand for. We're the party of aspiration. We were the party that wants to reduce people's taxation. We're the party that wants to fix Scotland after almost 2 decades of SNP government making just about everything worse.
Just give me some evidence that the people of Scotland trust you to do this more than they trust reform. I've got plenty of evidence to the contrary.
Well, we have been written off before, and we've proven the media commentators, the pundits, the pollsters, even the bookies wrong in the past. You know, we went into the 2021 election and everyone told us that Nicola Sturgeon was going to win a majority, and we stopped them because people understood that we were the only party that could be trusted to stand up to the SNP. We're the only party on the right side of things in respect of taxation. We're the only party that wants the Parliament to be focused on improving people's everyday lives. The Parliament, there's been a great disconnect between the voting public and the Scottish Parliament, who see a place that is not reflecting their interests. It's obsessed with issues such as pushing gender ideology and this constant agitation to break up the United Kingdom. And we're focused on the day job. We're focused on delivering for the people of Scotland.
That's not what we're talking about here at all. We're talking about a totally different enemy, an insurgent enemy who have marched into your house, gone into your wardrobe, put on your clothes and said, we live here now. It's your policies they've nicked and it's working.
Well, actually, they don't live here. Nigel Farage doesn't live in Scotland. I've lived in Scotland and I have to live with the consequences of SNP government. That's why. So
why did he get 26% of the vote in Hamilton?
Well, that party's taking votes from many parties for all sorts of different reasons. You know, Labour have lost votes to them, the SNP have lost votes to them. Little surprise, actually, because the reason John Swinney has spent so long talking up reform rather irresponsibly is because he knows that in Scotland, if you vote for reform, the biggest beneficiary is John Swinney's SNP. It's a vote to help put the SNP back into power. Nigel Farage is even on the record saying he'd be quite comfortable with another 5 years of SNP government, which for anyone who actually lives here, that would be an unmitigated disaster.
You told your party conference yesterday, we have a nationalist party wrecking Scotland and a socialist party wrecking Britain. The public are crying out for change. Two things on that. Firstly, that's Reform's message. And secondly, how can you offer change? You were in government for 15 years and you left it less than a year ago. We know what a Tory government's like. It's not change.
You know, I'm talking about the devolved Parliament, all the vast range of powers that are devolved to Edinburgh. That includes health, education, justice, transport. Every one of these things has got worse under the SNP. That's what we're talking about. Let's not conflate the UK government's record, which we have held our hands up when we've got things wrong, with what needs to be done with great urgency in Scotland.
I had Anas Sarwar and John Swinney on this programme last week, both setting out their stalls, opening their campaigns to become the First Minister of Scotland, both very sincerely telling me that is their hope and their expectation. Do you expect to be the next First Minister after the elections in a year's time?
Look, every Scottish Conservative leader gets asked this. I've been asked it a number of times. I think you would probably have a chuckle if I suggested that I'm likely to become the next First Minister.
Well, you're offering change.
But absolutely, because...
Well, how are you going to get that if you're not First Minister?
Well, if you look at the past few years of the Scottish Parliament, just when Labour, the Lib Dems and all the other parties of the left lined up behind the SNP, there was only one party consistently standing up to the SNP government and putting a brake on some of their more extreme ideas, including the costly deposit return scheme, including the gender self-ID legislation. All these things, it was only having a strong Scottish Conservative voice at Holyrood that prevented these things from happening. And that's the best way people can stop the SNP and put an end to a Parliament dominated by these fringe left-wing obsessions.
Right. Your flagship plan yesterday in your speech, basically funding tax cuts by cutting waste in the public sector. I mean, forgive me for pointing out that's another Nigel Farage policy, which I think he nicked off Donald Trump. Elon Musk was in charge of that department until it combusted. How does that work? What waste? Whose jobs?
Well,
where have you identified this flab?
Well, with all due respect, I disagree with your take on, efficient, lean government that delivers value for taxpayers being rooted in Donald Trump or Nigel Farage. That is a core Conservative value. We are there on the side of taxpayers. It is absolutely...
But not according to Nigel Farage. He's identified lots of waste that's been left over from your government from 15 years.
And I can do the same about Scotland, which is what we're talking about.
But where is it? What are you cutting?
Well, so, for example, right now, the Auditor General of Scotland, even he says he cannot identify all the myriad quangos and public sector bodies that exist in Scotland. The size of the state under the SNP has grown to an extremely ineffective, bloated state. It costs far too much money. The hard-working taxpayers are paying for all of that. Just today, I was looking at the list of government agencies and quangos on the government's official website, and there was a link taking you to an entity that's offering nose jobs and male breast reduction surgery. I believe the Scottish Government should be focused on cutting waste, reducing waste, not reducing the size of moobs. The government don't even know where their money is going. It's obscene. And then there's another entity called Criminal Justice Scotland. That gets £4 million a year. And some of the things it promotes is the policing of language. It tells the public that they shouldn't call criminals because it might stigmatise the poor wee souls. I mean, this is just ridiculous waste of money. And on top of that, you've got 5,500 public sector workers in Scotland earning over £130,000 a year. What are they all doing? And that's even before you get...
So their jobs are going?
No.
They're out?
No, but what we are saying is we would be laser focused on ensuring that every one of these jobs actually delivers for the taxpayer, delivers public services. And I bet you that if you asked John Swinney this question, he couldn't put his hand in heart and say that's actually happening just now.
What's your proposal with the universal winter fuel payment? You keep that? All pensioners get a winter fuel payment?
Yeah, we've said that it should never have been removed for 14 years of Conservative
So families on 30 grand a year are paying for millionaire pensioners to get a bit of a top-up on their fuel bills, and that's not waste?
Well, the starting point is for 14 years we preserved this, we respected it. The Labour government lied to the public. They said that they would keep it and then pulled it, and now they've got themselves in a right old mess over what they would do with it.
But that's waste, isn't it? By your calculation, you're making it reasonably trite, if I might suggest, observations about nose jobs, moobs and foreign language or whatever it was. But you're going to give money to rich people who don't need it.
We have said we would look at that. We have said we would look at all the universal benefits. Scotland's social security benefit is going to rise to £9 billion by 2030. This is unaffordable. So whether it's social security spending, whether it's this huge client state the SNP have built, or whether it's the vast salaries of people who don't deliver for taxpayers, all of that is in play, quite rightly.
Well, just let me ask you about you and your leadership. I mean, change is the watchword here. Everybody's offering change. It's going to be different. It's going to be different under me. What's the Russell Findlay conservatism like? How does it differ from Douglas Ross? How will you differ from Ruth Davidson? What will be the hallmark of your leadership?
Right, so I'm not a career politician. I came into this late. I spent decades as a journalist, often investigating organised crime. I think I'm tuned into what people actually care about. Part of my motivation for getting involved...
they weren't?
Well, part of my motivation for getting involved in politics was a frustration with the Scottish Parliament, was a frustration with the dire state of Scotland under the SNP. Scotland is crying out for change, and that's what motivated me. And what I believe in is fairness and justice. And I don't just mean within the justice system, which far too often betrays crime victims, something I'm very passionate about, but actually fairness and justice across society. So if your child should get the best schooling possible, and that's not happening under the SNP, you should be able to get a GP's appointment when you need it. And then when you're paying taxes in Scotland, you know that every single penny of that is being respected by government and spent wisely. Right.
It'll be a year in September since you took over the reins of the party. Are you enjoying it?
Yes.
Why?
Because I like a challenge. I'm resilient. Throughout my life, I never took the easy path. You know, even as a journalist, it would have been easier sometimes to not explore certain elements of organised crime that I did explore. And I did so because it was the right thing to do. Standing up for crime victims, often in the face of impossible difficulties in respect of the threat from criminals, or indeed the difficulties of the justice system. And I fight for the underdog. And as a politician, that's exactly what I intend to do.
Right, well, you are the underdog at the moment, that's for sure. We will watch your fight with interest. Russell Findlay, thank you very much indeed for being with us on the Sunday Show this morning. Just time for a quick reminder before we go that you can join me on Scotcast through the week. We're taking an in-depth look at the issues of the day every Monday to Thursday. You'll find us on BBC Sounds, on BBC One, on the BBC Scotland channel, wherever you get your podcasts. We're pretty much omnipresent. You can go to BBC Sounds right now and find the full back catalogue of episodes, loads to get your teeth into on a Sunday. But don't do that yet. Switch over to the radio and listen to Laura McKeever. Here she is.